The very first time I really learned much about the Dance of the Dragons was the history and lore animations on the Game of Thrones DVDs. I then of course read The Princess and the Queen, and then Fire and Blood much later. But even when I had just watched the DVD animations, something that struck me as a bit odd was the concept of House Velaryon having dragons and the obvious political implications of it. Part of what made Targaryen rule in Westeros so secure in the 129 years before the Dance of the Dragons was the dragons themselves. It's very hard to rebel and overthrow the ruling house when they have access to dragons. Dragons are effectively the nuclear weapons of A Song of Ice and Fire. Their mere existence acts as a deterrent. So another house having access to those weapons, no matter how closely related to House Targaryen they are, was always going to come back and bite them at some point. And during the Dance of the Dragons, you could argue it certainly did. The fact House Velaryon, Rhaenyra Targaryen's arguably most vital and biggest supporter, has access to dragons changes the picture of the conflict greatly. You have effectively a rival house to House Targaryen, who are part of a faction whose heir is of their blood and have access to at least 4 dragons from their own house, plus the Targaryen dragons and the Dragonseeds dragons, who are also part of the Black faction. So the question I want to delve into in this video is, was giving access to dragons to another house the huge mistake it appears to be on the surface? I want to talk about some real world history for a moment that gets across the political issue House Velaryon with dragons represents. A while ago, I made a video analysing the marriage of King Jaehaerys Targaryen and Good Queen Alysanne, and if their marriage was indeed for love, as we are led to believe in the history books, or if it was in reality a political match. In that video, I talk about some real world history, that the reason real royal houses were often so inbred were cousins marrying cousins, uncles and nieces, and so on. The idea was to keep the family's power and wealth in the family and not diluting it by marrying further afield and eroding their wealth and power over time. In this video, I argue that this could be a factor as to why House Targaryen is such a fan of incestuous marriages, even to the extent of brother and sister marriages, to the point it's commonplace, and there has to be special laws to allow them to do it. It keeps the power of House Targaryen with House Targaryen. It keeps the blood of the dragon within the house. If we view the dragons as an asset to the house, then marrying outside of it and allowing others access to the dragons dilutes the power they possess. So you could argue that is what happened by allowing House Velaryon access to dragons. It resulted in the political power of the dragons being lessened to some extent. We don't know exactly what the circumstances of Laena and Laenor Velaryon bonding with their dragons, or why Jaehaerys and Viserys allowed it. Something this video will delve into momentarily, but at the end of the day, regardless of how they got their dragons, another house in Westeros, even close allies of House Targaryen, so much so they're almost a cadet branch themselves, with a disputed claim to the throne having them, was always going to lead to a problem at some point. There is one factor I do want to address because it is important to the whole concept of allowing House Velaryon dragons. In reality, I don't think it's really under the control of a king or anyone who bonds or who has the right to bond with a dragon. At the end of the day, thanks to Rhaenys marrying into House Velaryon, the Velaryons and their heirs have the blood of the dragon in them. Traditionally, the children of a prince or a princess of House Targaryen were given the opportunity to have a dragon. The children of Rhaenys, although bearing the name Velaryon, have that same right, in the same way Luke, Jace and Joffrey had that right, being children of Rhaenyra. But the thing is, dragons have free will. They will bond with whomever they choose to. The king's feeling on the matter is not really going to factor in to how a dragon acts itself. For example, when Aemon One-Eye claims Vhagar, he didn't exactly have permission to do so, but he did it anyway, and it seems from at least the TV show, Vhagar bonding with Aemon was very much the choice of the dragon as well. At the end of the day, a dragon is not property to be owned. Now that we have that established, the idea of dragons having free will and who has a right to a dragon, we can address the question at the heart of this video. So House Velaryon got access to dragons via the marriage of Princess Rhaenys Targaryen and Corlys Velaryon. In 90 AC when they married, Rhaenys was already a dragon rider with Meleys. and as is the custom of House Targaryen, Corlys and Rhaenys' children were allowed to attempt to bond with a dragon. In this case, Laena and Laenor, bonding with Vhagar and Sea Smoke. A view that many in the fandom hold is that the dragons are property of the crown. Therefore, if you want to bond with one or claim one, you would therefore need the permission of the crown, and thus the king. Therefore, it is suspected that Rhaenys had permission from the king at the time to allow her children to bond with dragons. The timeline is a little bit tricky, as we don't know exactly when Sea Smoke or Vhagar bonded with Laena and Laenor, but Fire and Blood does suggest that Sea Smoke was hatched and bonded with Laenor before the Great Council of 101. Therefore, the king who would have given permission for this to happen would have been Jaehaerys. However, when it comes to Laena and Vhagar, there are no clear answers as to when they bonded, but Fire and Blood does seem to suggest she bonded with Vhagar at the age of 12, so that would place it around 104 AC. Jaehaerys allowing Rhaenys' children to have access to dragons or dragon eggs makes sense when you consider the time period it happened in. In Jaehaerys' view, the succession was secure, settled, and decided. He named Balon his heir over Rhaenys, and the Great Council's choice of Viserys over Laenor was a landslide. Therefore, if House Velaryon got access to dragons via Jaehaerys at this time, it does make a lot of sense. He had no way of ever knowing the chaos that would occur that led to the Dance of the Dragons, so allowing the Velaryon children dragons probably wouldn't have seemed a big issue. A popular fan theory is that it was in fact Good Queen Alysanne who gave Sea Smoke's dragon egg to Rhaenys, due to her disagreement with Jaehaerys over choosing Balon over Rhaenys as his heir after Aemon's death, and I can see a situation wherein Jaehaerys agreed in order to make peace with his queen over the situation and ending their quarrel. So Laenor having Sea Smoke makes perfect sense in the context of the time. However, Laena and Vhagar not so much. Fire and Blood suggests that she bonded with Vhagar in 104 AC, which would have been the second year of Viserys' reign as king. By this time, there was still a lot of bitterness in regard to Rhaenys being passed over in 92 AC, then again Laenor being passed over thanks to the Great Council in 101. Therefore, Viserys allowed a house with a direct rival claim to the throne, challenging even his own, a dragon, and not just any dragon, at the time the most powerful of the dragons. Again though, context really does matter. We're in the second year of Viserys' rule. He has no fears regarding his succession as of yet, and Laenor already had Sea Smoke. Denying Laena a chance to bond with a dragon, given her mother and brother have one already, would likely cause the rift between the houses to widen even further. By allowing Laena a chance to bond with a dragon, it would perhaps go a long way in placating House Velaryon. While at first it does come across as a very dumb political move, you have to remember these characters are human beings, and we're talking about close family here. But even so, giving a house with an active, direct rival claim to the throne, who are powerful in their own right, with the realm's most formidable navy, access to effectively your super weapons that can rival your own. The thing is, I can still understand some of the logic behind it in terms of making peace and being family, but it's still politically a really risky move. No matter whether we're talking about Jaehaerys or Viserys, the context of the situation at the time it was happening in matters. Viserys tried several times to bring Rhaenys and House Velaryon back into the fold after the Great Council of 101. Even without dragons, they were influential and powerful allies to have. Allowing Laena a dragon may have just been a way to placate them and compensate them for their loss at the Great Council. I mean, Corlys is hardly going to refuse his daughter one, let alone a Vhagar of all the dragons. I still think no matter what king allowed it, no matter the context and political situation, in the long term it could be seen as a very short-sighted move, but one I can understand the logic behind. Ultimately, at the time, Jaehaerys and Viserys could not have foreseen the events of the Dance of the Dragons. In Viserys' case, he and his queen, Aemma Arryn, are still young. They have Rhaenyra and hopes of having a son in the future. Plus, there is also Daemon, who'd have a strong claim to the throne. It's not until well down the line, after the death of Aemma, that the succession really starts to become a huge sticking point, one that gets even more complicated when you factor in Alicent Hightower and her children with Viserys, who also have strong claims to the throne. Maybe Viserys realised the issue of House Velaryon having access to dragons, and that could have been part of his motivation for marrying Rhaenyra to Laenor. It brings House Velaryon back into the fold and merges the two rival claims to the throne, and it also keeps the Velaryon dragons under direct Targaryen influence, especially if, as in House of the Dragon, Jaehaerys takes the name Targaryen should he ever become king. So with that match, everyone wins, and some of the possible risks are averted. While it did deal with the Velaryon claim to the throne, Viserys himself had also created another faction with dragons, with perhaps an even better claim to the throne than that of House Velaryon, Alicent Hightower's children, and what would later become the Green faction. Viserys dealt with one issue, only to create a more powerful one himself. So while yes, giving another house, in this case House Velaryon, access to dragons was always a questionable decision with some serious implications, by merging the claims to the throne, in a way, this issue is nullified to some extent. Hell, I would even argue, even if Laenor and Laenor were not given dragons, it wouldn't really make much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. I still think it's likely that Laenor and Rhaenyra marry, and given Rhaenyra being Viserys' named heir, I suspect Jace, Luke and Joffrey are still given dragon eggs or hatchlings. If you factor in the elements House of the Dragon added, wherein Jace takes the throne, he would do it under the name Targaryen, the whole issue will be nullified somewhat, even if Luke and Joffrey, who would still bear the name Velaryon, still had their dragons. But why is this question so important? There is a line in the opening moments of House of the Dragon that I really love. During the Great Council of 101, Rhaenys is doing a voiceover, wherein she says this: "The only thing that can tear down the House of the Dragon was itself." When you think about the circumstances of why the Dance of the Dragons happened, there are lots of cases where things happened in certain ways to allow for it. Not one single event or one single choice by a king, but many that converge into a situation that allowed for the dance to occur. I believe House Velaryon having dragons is one of those events, because depending on if they had them, it certainly influences the events in the build-up and during the Dance of the Dragons, and gives the Blacks a huge boost in terms of war assets. I just find political situations like this interesting, especially when you're looking at history via a wide lens, and you can start to see the ripples of choices people make having an impact decades later in ways they could have never have predicted.